Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Michael Bernstein, Professor of History and Dean of Arts and Humanities here at UC San Diego. I will be your moderator for tonight's debate. I'd like to introduce to you the sponsor of this program, most importantly, Grant Davis Denny, board member of California Common Cause.
Thank you very much. As he said, my name is Grant Davis Denny, and I'm a board member with California Common Cause. And on behalf of the organization, I'd like to welcome all of you here to tonight's debate. California Common Cause is the state arm of a national organization that's dedicated to holding power accountable. Here in California, we have 40,000 members, and we're particularly proud of our activists here in San Diego who are leading the charge to clean up city government. We are active at the national, state, and local level. At the national level, we're leading efforts to hold politicians accountable for recent ethics violations. At the state level, we're dedicated to making sure that California voters have the information they need on who's funding California state initiatives. And at the local level, we're leading efforts to clean up city government. Which brings us to why we're here tonight. I don't need to recount the recent scandals in San Diego city government. When California Common Cause heard about those scandals, we teamed up with local activists to hold a conference on government accountability. Out of that conference arose the idea for a debate among the primary candidates for San Diego mayor. Because that debate was such a success in focusing attention on these important issues, we decided to hold a final debate between the remaining two candidates for San Diego's mayor. California Common Cause is not alone in this project. We'd like to thank our partners, UCSD for hosting this event, UCSD TV, the League of Women Voters, our co-sponsors, and the members of the Debate Planning Committee. Finally, we'd like to thank all of you for showing up at tonight's event. Thank you.
And now please join me in welcoming Mary Walshock, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Extended Studies in Public Programs and the General Manager of UCSD TV.
We're delighted to have all of you here. It is fantastic when a university like UCSD, with its diverse student body and faculty and staff, can collaborate with community groups addressing issues of such importance, like who is going to be the next person to lead our city. We're very committed to engaging in the issues that are shaping the future of our region, and we feel very privileged that Common Cause and the League of Women Voters invited us to be co-sponsors tonight. On behalf of the Chancellor and everyone at UCSD, I'd like to welcome you, and I'd certainly like to remind you to vote on November 8th. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, let me invite our panelists to come up on stage and be seated. Game plan this evening. You're over here. Check your name places. Now let me introduce our panelists. I'll start here on my left, your right. First we have Ms. Kay Reagan, the President of the League of Women Voters of San Diego. Next to her, Jean Brown, representing California Common Cause. And Tito Zavaios, representing Neighborhoods for Clean Elections. To my right, your left, our panelists from UCSD. My colleague Thad Kusser, an assistant professor of political science here on campus. Next to Thad, Laura Quinn, the president of UCSD's Graduate Student Association. And Christopher Sweeten, the president of Associated Students, the undergraduate government here at UC San Diego. We'd also like to welcome Professor Kusser's students, who we understand are present this evening, or they'd better be. Okay, the format of our debate will be as follows. Each of the panelists will have the opportunity to ask two questions, the same two questions of each of the candidates. The second question asked might be a follow-up to the first question, or it may be an altogether separate topic. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond to each question put to them. We have a timekeeper here in the front row. He looks quite fierce. He will keep the candidates honest. At the conclusion of this segment, I will ask a question of the candidates, possibly, if time permitting. Then we're going to turn the event over to you in the audience. We have microphones set up in the aisles where you can line up, and we'll alternate between the two. We will be providing cards for you to write down your questions so that you can keep your questions short and to the point. Remember, this is an opportunity this evening to hear from the candidates, not from you or from us. The less from you, the less from us, the more from them. I would also mention we will not tolerate personal attacks on the candidates, from the panelists, from members of the audience, from the moderator. Let's please show everyone the respect that they deserve, these two fellow citizens who are standing for high office in our city. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the two candidates for mayor of San Diego, Donna Frye and Jerry Sanders. Welcome.
Thank you.
To begin our debate this evening, we're asking the candidates to give brief opening statements of 1 minute and 30 seconds to determine who gets to go first. We have a brand new George Washington quarter here. I will flip the quarter without objection. We'll allow Ms. Frye to call it in the air.
I hope that's a California quarter.
Thank God it is. Okay. Just call it in the air.
Tails.
Heads. So, Mr. Sanders will get to make an opening statement first, then Ms. Frye, and when we come to the latter part of the program, we can reverse the order given the outcome of the coin toss. So first, let me turn to Mr. Sanders for his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Common Cause and UCSD, and I'd like to thank each of you for coming out on a Friday night, even though some of you may have been coerced into coming here. This is an important part of electoral politics in San Diego, and we're in the most important election we're probably going to see in our generation. We're in the midst of the most serious crisis we've ever been in San Diego. In the city's financial crisis, both the pension system and the structural problems that we have taken up most of the debate, and probably rightfully so. But there are many other issues that are just as deep and underline the problems that we're having in this city. Those underlying problems really revolve around governance. They really revolve around openness. They really revolve around decisions being made behind closed doors. They revolve around budget shell games where we're simply not honest with our budgeting, where the city of San Diego doesn't put out a budget that anybody else can read. We're talking about politicians who say one thing and go behind closed doors and do another thing. We're talking about politicians who make promises and don't have any capacity to carry out those promises. We're also talking about a culture where City Hall views citizens as adversaries instead of as partners or as customers. I've turned around 3 organizations that made fundamentally the same mistakes. The police department had lost the confidence of San Diego. I turned that around and allowed the citizens to have a much fuller participation in what we did as a police department. The United Way's bureaucracy got in the way of us working with the agencies we work so closely with. And finally, Red Cross wasn't truthful about the finances. As mayor, I'll work on all these issues using the experience that I've learned over those past 15 years. Thank you.
Ms. Frye.
Thank you. First off, I would like to thank California Common Cause, the University of California, San Diego, and also the League of Women Voters for hosting this debate. And I would also like to thank the audience for coming tonight. We appreciate that very much, and also Mr. Sanders for agreeing to debate. I appreciate that as well. For those of you who know me, you know that my public life has been defined by fighting for open and honest government. And for those of you who are just getting to know me, I hope tonight that you will learn a little bit more about what I have done and how I have accomplished many of the open government provisions that the citizens now enjoy here in the city of San Diego. To get past the financial problems that have plagued our city for too long, we need to have a comprehensive plan that addresses all of our financial problems. But we can't address it in a piecemeal fashion, and we can't do it with empty promises. And we need to make sure that it's done in an open environment with full public participation, with honest accounting, real numbers, and making sure that you always have the final approval on whatever decisions are made. And thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. I look forward to the debate.
Now to our panelists. First, Kay Reagan, your first question goes to Mr. Sanders.
How will you lead the city as the first strong mayor?
Well, I think it's an excellent opportunity to make fundamental change in San Diego. If we really think about what the next mayor is going to do, the next mayor will be the CEO of an 11,000-member, $2.2 billion enterprise. I think it requires considerable experience to run an organization like that. I have had that leadership experience. I've had the experience of running large organizations. I've had the experience of administering them, of managing them, and actually being held accountable for all of the decisions that I made. One of the things that we need to do is get ourselves back on a firm footing. We need to do that by having a strong ethical basis for the way we pursue city governance. That ethical basis is not just for elected politicians. It's not just for appointed board and commission members. It's for every single member of the city workforce. And it's also for every lobbyist that's going to come before us. We need to have that plan in writing. We need to have training that goes with it frequently. It has to be modeled from the top down. And I think that's one of the things that I've left behind in each of the organizations that I've been a part of. A strong, transparent police department with 1,200 volunteers who had access to every single system we had on the police department. We put our crime stats on the website before any other police department in the country, block by block. Red Cross, during the 2003 wildfires, we had auditors in so that they could provide that information on a weekly basis to anybody in San Diego who wanted to see how their precious donor dollars were going. And finally, United Way with its openness after the problems they had.
As the city of San Diego's next strong mayor in January of next year, my first plan is to make sure that you know that the mayor is accountable to you, and that's part of my AAA financial plan. And the first part of that is accountability, making sure that one person, and that would be myself, the mayor, is accountable to you, the voters. The second thing I would do is structure the mayor's office much differently than it is now, and much differently than my opponent has discussed. I envision my strong mayor office to be a cabinet structure, and I would eliminate the position of city manager, because when the voters voted for a strong mayor, the mayor became the city manager. The other thing I would do is I would make sure that I was accessible and available to the public. One of the things that I will have the opportunity to do under this new structure is that the mayor will no longer preside over the city council meetings, which will give me more opportunity to go out into the communities, to talk to people, to hold meetings in the evening when it's convenient for the public and not convenient just for the elected officials. And so it would create a whole new dialogue, a whole new model, going out and having regular weekend and evening meetings and really engaging the public in helping make our city the incredible city that I know it can be.
Second question to Ms. Frye.
How will you go about finding this cabinet, our city manager, and who will you appoint?
Well, I've already started, and I actually have many people that are interested. As far as a city manager, I will not have a city manager on my staff. The mayor becomes the city manager, and I think it would be duplicative. As far as the cabinet positions, I'm going to do a national search. I have many people that are very, very interested, but I believe that rather than sometimes recycling, simply moving people around within the current bureaucracy, that it would be an excellent idea to bring in some new, the best and the brightest talent, and also that my cabinet would reflect what the community looks like, that would actually celebrate the diversity of San Diego and make sure that all the community interests were represented, and not the same old people, sort of the business as usual that we continue to see.
Mr. Sanders.
I wasn't sure if you just want me to go or not. I'm very excited about this opportunity to be the strong mayor. I've already made a very public statement that retired Admiral Ronnie Froman will be my COO. Will literally run the operation on a day-to-day basis. And the reason I want somebody like Admiral Froman is because she has run the largest Navy region in the world. She consolidated, streamlined, brought efficiencies to it, really brought that entire operation together to so that there weren't duplications all over the system. I think the next mayor needs to be out of the office. I think the next mayor needs to be in every community in San Diego. The next mayor needs to be at meetings just like this. The next mayor needs to be at forums that are either sponsored by the mayor's office or requested by the community. I think also the next mayor needs to be lobbying very heavily in Sacramento, Washington, D.C. for our fair share of infrastructure dollars, for our fair share of Homeland Defense dollars, for our fair share of health and human service dollars, and we know we're not getting those right now, and those are critical pieces of San Diego's infrastructure. I've also asked for the top 300 managers in the city to submit resignations to me on January 3rd, and that's because we simply will not have space for 300 managers. We need new blood, we need new ideas, we need new expertise, and that's going to require bringing new people into the positions. But finally, I'm willing to interview each of those 300 to see if they're willing to be part of a fundamental change process in this city structure. And this city structure is exactly what needs that change, and I want people who want to be part of that, who have valuable ideas in how to do it, and who also have interacted with customers around San Diego, whether it's UCSD or San Diego State, whether it's business, and that we get recommendations for them saying that they would fit in well and be part of a good change structure.
Now over to Thad Kusser, your first question to Ms. Frye.
A key task for the next mayor will be to help solve the city's $1.4 billion pension deficit while keeping the budget balanced. What specific steps, what specific fiscal steps would you propose, like increases in revenues, specific spending cuts, increased borrowing, renegotiation of the pension deficit, and how many dollars do you think each of those steps would take to solve this problem?
Well, first of all, it's not just it's actually about $1.7 to $1.9 billion for the pension problem, and I must say that it's not just the pension crisis. One of the things that I think maybe some people are not aware of, but for example, the infrastructure, the deficit with the current infrastructure in our city is probably closer to $2 billion, which is probably higher than the pension debt. The unfunded needs, and that means just trying to maintain current service levels, is probably somewhere between $500 million. So just to give you an idea, the problem is everywhere. It's not just the pension, and we need to understand that. Some of the specific things that I would do, and the thing I would do the first day that I was elected, was to make sure that the city ceased to recognize as a liability the illegal benefits. And that could bring us in, and again, these have to be somewhat rough numbers, but approximately $500 million. The other thing I would do specifically is the redevelopment agencies in the city of San Diego currently owe the city over $200 million. What I would do is I would start restructuring that debt and make sure that the redevelopment agencies started paying back between $10 and $20 million a year until those loans were paid back. The other issue is to make sure that as far as hard dollars, is to reduce, just for example, in the mayor's office, the duplicative services would net us about $50 to $500 million.
Mr. Sanders.
Well, those are some great ballpark numbers, but let me give you some specifics. One of the things that I've said that is absolutely critical in the pension system is, number one, you can't just stop making payments. That's a full employment act for all the attorneys in the city of San Diego, the city of Los Angeles, the city of New York, the city of any place else that you can imagine. If you just stop making payments without a judge making that determination, because this is in the courts, it needs to go through the court process. It should have gone to the courts quite some time ago. There'll be suits by each individual pension holder and future pension holder. What we instead need to do is bring the employees back to the table. I've done that by telling them that I will not take bankruptcy off the table, and if necessary, I'll make a 10% cut in the general fund workforce. That's not something I want to do, but that brings in $64 million a year if you do that in the wide span. I've also said I'll freeze salaries until we have a stable work environment, a stable financial environment in the city of San Diego. That's worth $35 million right there. Each year that the city employees do not take a pay raise cuts $150 to $180 million off of the pension deficit. When you couple that with a new system, and I've asked for a charter amendment to go out in next summer or next fall, with that, we can stop the bleeding right there. We can use the increased contributions by city employees to their pension system, and we can use that to bond out, using the employees' dollars to bond that money out. We will not pay for illegal benefits, but we will pay for legal benefits.
Your second question to Mr. Sanders first.
Speaking of ballparks,
I can't. Can you get a
Sure.
Thank you.
Speaking of ballparks, what do you see as the city's appropriate role in keeping the Chargers in San Diego and assessing the future Qualcomm Stadium? Would you consider things like a public subsidy, a gift of public lands, a new ticket guarantee?
I hope I don't look that dumb. You know, I think it's absolutely critical that we have a public discussion about the Chargers. We don't have any money in the city. Every dollar we have is going to have to go to pave potholes. It's going to have to go to infrastructure. It's going to have to go to city services. It's going to have to go to 6 to 6. The Chargers have decided to bypass the council because they found no one to speak to there. They're going to have to go out to the voters, and that gives the voters an excellent opportunity to see what the Chargers are bringing forward. The Chargers have started putting a plan forward. They've gone to community forums. It's going to be up to them to sell this program to San Diegans, and that's going to be a tough sell. They're going to have to provide a compelling program, a compelling development that does much what Petco did for downtown, where it brought $5 billion in investment into the downtown area. But the San Diego Chargers are going to have to convince the taxpayers of that. There are environmental issues, and I think we need to be very careful about remediation issues. Who knows what's underneath that stadium parking lot after having huge gas storage facilities on the northeast corner of that for the last 40 years. But I think the Chargers will go out, and it's going to be up to them to provide a good, compelling case so the voters of San Diego can decide whether or not they want to approve that. But simply put, the San Diego, the city, has no money. We can't give them a subsidy.
And to Ms. Frye.
The first thing that the Chargers need to do, and actually are going to be doing, is to present their plan before the public at a public hearing. And in fact, working through my office and my Government Efficiency and Openness Committee, we had extended an invitation to the Chargers to make a presentation. They have now agreed to come before the Land Use and Housing Committee to do that, and I believe that will be in October. So despite what Mr. Sanders said, they actually are coming and talking to the City Council. Second, we need to make sure that whatever the plan is that they present, that the numbers, that the financial numbers actually make sense and they actually add up, because we know what happened the last time. Not only did they not add up, but they made no sense, and you got snookered, and the citizens had to pay for the city's bad mistakes. That I will make sure does not happen again. As far as what's under the stadium, we know what's under the stadium, and we know exactly what's happening from that tank farm. We have MTDB, we have PAHs leaking, and the city of San Diego is in the process of requiring the Kinder Morgan, who owns the tank farm, and cleaning that up. So bottom line with the Chargers, it has to benefit the public. there should be no public subsidies, and it has to be always in the public's best interest. And it must include, for the community and the residents of Mission Valley, a minimum of 68 to 70 acres of public parkland, because there is no public parkland in Mission Valley.
Now over to Jean Brown. First question to Mr. Sanders.
Yes, both of you have indicated a support for stronger laws requiring our city government to be open and ethical. In July, the Defending Democracy Forum, Mr. Sanders, you expressed concern that our city council meetings have no set agendas, leaving the public in the dark about what is being discussed and when and how they could participate in the discussion. Ms. Frye, you talked about concerns that meetings have been closed and documents and reports that should have been made public have been kept secret. If you are each elected, or whoever is elected, what steps would you make to make our city government more open?
I don't think San Diego's ready for both of us to be elected at the same time. It might be interesting. You know, one of the concerns I've had for years, and I've voiced the concern before, is City Council puts out an agenda, which they have to do by the Brown Act, but there's no time certain on it. So they get a huge crowd of people, just like this, waiting to talk about an issue. When they say a huge crowd and it's a controversial issue, that bit gets put back on the agenda. I talked to some folks the other day who waited for 8 hours. The crowd was gone when their agenda item came forward. That is not fair. There can be time-certain agenda items where you get things done in a manner that allow people to come forward and speak knowledgeably about that. Talk about closed meetings. Councilmember Frye has talked about closed meetings. She's opposed them. Yet we've seen instances where we have an open public council meeting about attorneys for city employees who are being sued civilly by the city. And that's done in open. That's done in open session. They were denied their benefits. Council went into closed session when the Police Officers Association, all the members of council, went into closed session when the Police Officers Association sued and voted themselves the right to have attorneys paid for by the city. Now, in my estimation, that's saying one thing and doing another, and I don't think that benefits the public. I don't think it benefits city employees. I don't think it benefits anybody when you can't view the process about how that goes about.
Actually, I've already started making the change with open government. If you recall, back in March of 2004, it was myself and Deputy Mayor Atkins who actually boycotted the closed session meetings. And many of you were here, including the League of Women Voters and Common Cause, and folks came down to the City Council. And within 3 weeks, because I stayed out for 3 weeks, but within 3 weeks, we managed to change the permanent rules of council to require a number of things, including a court transcriber in closed session, so that every single word that was said is transcribed. The fact that the dockets describing what item is actually going to be heard in closed session is well described, and the public has the opportunity to comment on that. And as a result of that, in November of last year, there was Proposition D that I managed to get on the ballot with no opposition, and that was the public access to government records. You wonder why there are so many documents being released now. It was a result of that charter change that gave the public and the media the greater access to the documents, which, again, you are now starting to see. That passed with over 80% of the vote. So that was an amazing change. And it also, as a result of that, we were able to establish the Government Efficiency and Openness Committee, which covers these issues, and many of you have attended those as well, where we've talked about things like instant runoff voting and a variety of issues that are important to you. And that is now a permanent City Council committee.
Okay. In the last few years, San Diegans have had to vote in 6 elections. This special election will cost San Diego $2 million. Many people have expressed confusion and frustration about how many special elections have been held. Do you support ideas like all absentee voting or instant runoff voting for special elections?
Yes, and as far as all the special elections, I think I've been in all of them. If I haven't been, I feel like it. So yes, when there was an item before the council to do an all-mail ballot for the special election, and I voted to support that, and yes, I would continue to do that because I think it would have saved money, and it was, it was a relatively simple issue as far as, candidates. So that I did support. And just this past week, at my Government Efficiency and Openness Committee, we had a hearing on instant runoff voting, and we are now in the process of putting together a committee to do some more research on that. We had a presentation by Ed Tesher, who gave a great presentation on that. We had a presentation by the city clerk, and the beauty of instant runoff voting is that you would have had 3 less elections, and you would have had an outcome much sooner, and I think that would provide greater stability for especially in these times. But yes, it makes good sense, and I would absolutely support that, and will continue to support that, and will continue to bring that before my committee. So another plug for my Government Efficiency and Openness Committee. It's on the web. It's Monday mornings at 9 a.m., so please make sure you come.
And Mr. Sanders.
One of the things that I think is important is that we watch other communities and how they conduct their elections, especially when they're going to a new technology, when they're going to instant runoff, when they're going to a mail-in ballot. And I know we've had experience in some communities with a mail-in ballot. I know we've done it in San Diego. It's probably been about 20 years ago. My concern is about the possibility of fraud in those. We saw reports from Oregon where we heard that in some cases people were buying ballots from people for $5 and $10 a ballot. We need to watch these other communities and see about the legitimacy of the voting on those. On the instant runoff, we need to do the same thing. If they work in other communities and there's a solid track record, then I can support that. I think that makes sense. But I don't want to be the first one that tests them or one of the first ones in the vanguard, especially with the problems we've had in elections in San Diego and this country. I think we need to clearly think through that. It's also about the write-in candidates, and Councilmember Frye was she was the victim of the last write-in ballot when she was on there circling the ballots and all of that. I do find it interesting, though, when her and I are in a runoff, she was one of the ones that voted against letting write-in candidates in. And that does seem to me to be a little odd since you benefited from that the first time. So I think we need to be consistent about what we're saying and what we're doing again.
Clarify.
We're going to move on. We're going to move on. Let's move on to Laura Quinn, who has her first question for Ms. Frye.
We all know it's expensive to live in San Diego. However, the statistics for home ownership are eye-opening. Only 9% of households in San Diego County are able to afford a median-priced home. Of those who are able to own their own home, 20% spend more than half their monthly income on it. With so few residents able to own homes, one would hope to see affordable rental options in San Diego, but even those are being converted to condominiums at a staggering rate. What will you do to make sure that residents can afford to stay just that, residents of San Diego?
Well, one of the things that we did on affordable housing was to pass an ordinance. It's an inclusionary housing ordinance. And what that requires is that new development and redevelopment include a certain percentage of affordable housing. Unfortunately, in order to get that ordinance passed, we needed to add an in-lieu fee that allowed the developers to waive the requirements to actually build the housing on site and instead allow them to pay a fee. Now, that has been increased somewhat. The other thing that we have been working on is the condominium conversion issues. In fact, that was just before our Land Use and Housing Committee meeting. Some of the things we need to do to make sure that renters are not displaced when they have condominium conversions is to make sure that the apartment stock, that there is actually housing available for them to move into. Some of the changes that we are making is to make sure that, for example, there are at least 3 months rent that will be provided to the residents who are having to move. Make sure that they are made fully aware of their rights if they have to move and what the provisions of the laws are, because what has been happening is many of the renters have no idea when they receive the notice that this is a very lengthy process and they are led to believe that it's like a 30-day eviction notice. So we've been working diligently to standardize that and make sure that they have the ability to enforce the existing laws.
You know, I think there's a more fundamental issue here, and it's one about the future of San Diego. If we want a future of San Diego to be a place where our children can live, then we're going to need to work very hard on streamlining city processes, streamlining all the processes that allow new building, that allow us to build smart building, allow us to use a city of villages concept where the city helps provide the infrastructure. We do mixed-use retail, we do mixed-use condos and apartments, and we incentivize all of that. We need to incentivize the building of affordable apartments in the city. The city has considerable holdings in property. Some of those pieces of property can be used in conjunction, in partnership, with building affordable apartment housing and building affordable housing. We need to start exploring that opportunity. We need to streamline city processes. We need to make our city workers, when they're working with people in any industry, whether it's business, whether you want to parade in your community, whether you want to build affordable housing, we need to streamline that process so we give answers very quickly. Right now, it takes 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 years to get a plan done to build some of this housing. That is never going to help us have affordable housing. That's one of the things that we really need to get on. We need to restructure the city so that we actually view all of you, no matter what you're trying to do with the city, as a partner and as a customer, instead of viewing you as the adversary. And I think that's one of the things that will help us provide more housing that will be affordable to our children who need the 70% of the housing being built for themselves.
And your second question to Mr. Sanders first.
Watching the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita has shown Americans that what may seem like the best laid plans can crumble in the event of an actual emergency. In both of these cases, the fortitude and flexibility of the mayor has proven as important as any governmental agency. What have you learned from these situations, and how can you relate that to plans already in place for disaster response in San Diego?
Well, what I've learned from these situations is it requires strong leadership immediately. It requires strong coordination immediately. It requires working with FEMA. It requires working with state agencies, county agencies, and city agencies. But I've spent 35 years doing this. I've spent 35 years making critical decisions, preparing communities so that when disaster hits, if we do have a disaster, and I shouldn't say if, we will. We have fires. We know we're going to have them. We know we're going to have an earthquake. We need to prepare our communities. We need to make sure that they don't need to depend on anybody because they're prepared. They can depend on each other for a period of time till we can get help to them. We need to make sure that we've got clear lines of communication with every agency, whether it's state, federal, or local. We need to make sure our communication systems mesh. In the 2003 wildfires, we found out that the California Department of Forestry still could not contact the San Diego Police Department over common radio frequencies. We need to have pre-positioned agreements in place with Department of Defense, with the City of San Diego and the County of San Diego, so those assets can be brought in without one phone call anywhere else because we've already got those agreements laid out. That's what I've done working with Red Cross, working with United Way, working with the police department, is not only preparing our communities for that, but also responding quickly and providing the leadership that's necessary to pull a community through a disaster.
Ms. Frye.
One of the things I have learned by watching some of the disasters, not just here in the city of San Diego over the years, but also in the South, is the fact that many of the natural disasters are made much worse by very bad planning practices. One of the things that some of our cities have done is they have failed to understand how cities should grow, where buildings should be built, things like building in floodplains, things like filling in wetlands. If you build in the middle of the San Diego River, you're probably going to get wet. And if there's great rains that come, you can probably bet that there will be flooding because it floods every single year. So what I have learned that I think in the long run is that we need to make sure that our city's progress guide and general plan, because we're in the process of updating it, that it has the disaster preparedness element in it, that it has the seismic preparedness element in it, that it is well thought through, and that we make sure as we move forward as a city that we don't create a worse problem, that we make sure that we can prevent the natural disasters that we know that are going to occur from being worse. And of course, I would agree with Mr. Sanders as far as the better communication system that are needed and better communication between the multi-jurisdictional agencies.
Now to Tito Zavaios. Your first question goes to Mr. Sanders first.
First, a quick definition for those who may be unfamiliar with the concept or unclear on it. Clean elections, also known as clean money or voter-owned elections, are programs that provide full public financing for candidates who voluntarily agree not to take private money, use their own, and to abide by accountability and sunshine rules so that the money is well looked after so that the investment of the public is protected. My question is, as San Diego's first strong mayor, will you order a feasibility study for the implementation of a clean elections program for citywide and city council elections, as the members of Los Angeles City Council have just proposed for their city, and work to pass the best possible measure for San Diego?
Well, first of all, this is the first time I've ever run for public office, and it's been an eye-opening experience. Campaign fundraising isn't the most pleasant activity that you're ever going to do. From a police standpoint, we were taught never to ask for anything from anybody. From a public candidate perspective, you're taught to go out and ask for contributions, and it's been a tough transition for me. I'm very proud of over 3,600 donors right now, though, who supported my candidacy. I'd like to see full funding by the taxpayers, but simply put, right now in San Diego, we don't have the money to do that. That would be at the expense of potholes. That would be at the expense of 6 to 6. That would be at the expense of a lot of other things that are critically needed in this city. I do support the sunshine issues. I gave everything we had on a disc to the Union Tribune last night. We're giving out we're giving every donation that we get, whether it's $300, which is the maximum I can take, or whether it's $5 or $10 on the website, along with the people who donated that. I think it's absolutely critical we give that. And I'd like to see us stop the special interest money. I'd like to see the independent expenditure stop. I can't compete with union special interest special expenditures of $170,000. I can only get $300 at a time. I made a pledge when we started this. I asked Councilmember Frye to join me in that, to stop the independent expenditures in this election. I'm still waiting to hear about that because I haven't heard anything in return. But let's depend on our own strategies and not special interests to do that.
Ms. Frye.
I'll just respond briefly that Mr. Sanders needs to read the campaign laws, and he would know that candidates are prohibited from having discussions with anyone who would be making any sort of independent expenditures. And you need to study the laws, Mr. Sanders. But to answer the actual question, I'm not waiting until I become the mayor to start addressing these campaign finance reform issues. And in fact, I have invited Common Cause and anybody else to call my committee consultant, and we will be scheduling hearings to start addressing this very soon. We need to do it as soon as we can get it on the docket, which I hope will be within the next month. It's that important. And whether or not giving campaign contributions buys influence, and it can be debated, the fact of the matter is, it certainly gives the appearance of it. It certainly gives the appearance that somebody who might have given you $300 might get greater access than someone who did not. And that is not acceptable. And I think right now, particularly what's been going on in the city, and not just our city, but throughout the United States, quite frankly, is that we need to do everything we can to limit the appearance of impropriety and to actually return the government to the public and actually be beholding to the public and serving the public interest. And that's what publicly financed campaigns do.
Your second question goes to Ms. Frye first.
This was contingent on the answer, and Mr. Sanders, you seem to, your answer, if I got it correctly, is that you don't think we can afford it at the time. So I would like to ask you, how else will you suggest we can do something to control the undue influence of private money on political campaigns?
I'm happy to take that first. That's no problem. I have read the special expenditure laws, Councilmember Frye. And I also know the reality that if you know somebody's going to put special interest money in because they've done it in the primary, you certainly need to talk to them so they don't do it in the general election. That's once again a disservice to the public when you say that you're not allowed to do that, and yet you know it's going to occur, and you can tell people not to do that. I think it's absolutely critical. I would be for banning special expenditures in political campaigns in the city of San Diego altogether. I think a $300 limit. There is nobody that buys influence with $300. There's nobody who buys influence with $100. Somebody who volunteers every day in a campaign and doesn't donate $1 probably has more influence over policy as you're forming it than somebody who gives you $300 and never speaks to you again. I think the limits are appropriate. I think that we can work within that system, but special expenditures, when huge amounts of money are spent in ways that you have no control over, especially with union money right now, because that's one of the biggest issues. And the union members don't even get a choice on whether their money is being spent or not. That's simply taken out of their dues and it's taken forward. And I don't think that's fair. As a police officer and part of the Police Officers Association, I didn't care for that and I didn't have a choice. I think we need to work within that $300 limit. We need to limit independent expenditures. We need to stop them and let the candidates bring the public support in however they can in the small limits.
Ms. Frye.
Well,
Ms. Frye,
I sure hope Jerry will talk to the people that are sending out the hit pieces against me with the independent expenditures and tell them to knock it off. Yeah. I mean, Jerry. What can I say?
Ms. Donna, my question, since you answer in a supportive manner, would be, would you elect to run as a clean candidate, which is to elect to abide by these rules and not take private money?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it would be wonderful because it frees me up. It frees up my time. I mean, one of the things that I like about campaigning, otherwise I wouldn't do it so often, is the fact that I can actually get out and talk to the public, and I actually have the opportunity to have discussions, to have debates, to go to different forums, and to meet people I might not otherwise meet. And so I like the idea of being freed up from the dialing for dollars, and I would rather raise money for different causes that were more important to me. I mean, it unfortunately right now it's the nature of the beast, and we must do that because I have to remain competitive so I can get my message out to the voters. But would I prefer the other? Of course, anybody that's run for election would understand that.
And now to Christopher Sweeten. Your first question goes to Ms. Frye first.
My question is about educational equity. Statistics show that San Diego public schools located south of Interstate 8 receive less funding from the school board and are consistently rated lower in academic achievement than schools located elsewhere in San Diego. What would you do as mayor to improve public education so that all students are given equal resources and opportunities to compete for things like being accepted to UCSD?
Well, one of the things that I can do is continue to work with members of the school board, continue to work with people such as instructors and educators and students and parents to help change that. As the mayor, I can use the office as a bully pulpit to express the views of the community, to speak out against inequities, to work with the state and federal legislators who often have control over that. I can make sure that when there are issues that are extremely important to the community related to educational issues, that I'm there, that I'm present, that I'm at the meetings, that I'm out in the community, that I'm speaking out for equity in education. Beyond that, we can make sure that, that you are provided with a forum through the city that you're able to also express your views. That hasn't really happened. And I can also put together, as the mayor, an educational committee that would include instructors and educators and parents and teachers and students, and have meetings. But one thing with these meetings, and it's going to be one thing we're going to do when I hold meetings, is that we will have at least one action item per meeting that we must complete and we must be done, so we don't keep having meetings. One action item per meeting, a minimum.
Mr. Sanders.
You know, I've had an opportunity to participate in the very conversation you're talking about in very concrete ways. Number one, I was 10 years on the, as a board member on the Children's Initiative, and I chaired the Children's Initiative. We came up with a 0 to 5 plan, so we had children who were nutritionally healthy, who had their shots, who had correct upbringing by training young mothers and bringing those mothers in for training, or going out and visiting them so that they learned parenting skills. I was also on the Children's Initiative and chaired it when we came up with the 6 to 6 program to allow children to go to school early, to become prepared for school with a good meal, and then after-school enrichment programs. I was a part of Dr. Stephen Weber's task force, and it was UCSD was on it, Skip Manos, the educational dean out at San Diego State, where we talked about the quality of education citywide. We talked about the fact we needed to keep teachers, keep experienced teachers south of Interstate 8 in the more difficult schools, so that the children in those schools had a better opportunity to learn from more experienced teachers. I was also part of a foundation group who asked me to be a co-chair, and it was with UPAC. And we literally met on providing parents more power in the school system so that parents could help dictate some of those things. And we met several times and came up with a strategy for that and met with the San Diego Unified School District. And finally, I was on the NCCJ board for 10 years, the National Conference for Christians and Jews, and then the National Conference for Community and Justice. We took high school students from all over the city to Camp Anytown, where we did diversity training, tolerance training for weeks at a time, and I think that helps out also.
Your second question goes to Mr. Sanders first.
My second question is about leadership. A recent poll showed that 73% of San Diego voters believe the city is headed in the wrong direction. You have both talked tonight about your plans to address specific problems, but we all know that things happen that nobody could anticipate. So, given that we don't know all the problems that will come before you as mayor, how should voters judge your ability to lead the city?
Well, I think it's important for voters to look at past history. I think it's important for voters to look at the candidate's experience. I think it's important for voters to look at my record on the San Diego Police Department, where we turned an organization that was having trouble in the community into one that worked very well with the community and worked with the community to provide a very significant decrease in crime. I think they need to look at my record in the Red Cross, where I went in after the board and the CEO had been fired by the National Board of Governors of the American Red Cross for the first time in Red Cross's history. I went in with a small group of volunteers, reformed that chapter, brought a new board in, brought in Admiral Ronnie Froman, and we're now able to respond quickly to disasters. I think they ought to look at my record at United Way, where I went into an agency that had lost the trust of the agencies that we served, was known for its bloated bureaucracy. I went in there and helped streamline. I went in there, made peace with our agencies that provide all the services that our children and seniors and everybody else need in between. I have been in a leadership position actively in the city of San Diego for 35 years. I went on the police department when I was 22 years old and started making leadership decisions. I ran a 3,000-member organization with a $220 million budget and 1,200 volunteers who provided transparency, and that's the leadership skills that I possess, and I can anticipate that we will find problems in this city. It's going to take strong leadership that's willing to accept responsibility for the outcome and for mistakes that that individual makes, and that's what I'm willing to do as mayor.
Ms. Frye.
When you think of leadership, you think of experience, and I bring to the table a variety of experiences. For example, I have the experience of running a business. I'm a small business owner. I bring to the table the experience of being a community advocate who has served the public as a volunteer for 20, 25 years or longer. But I also bring you the experience of someone who is an elected official and has served the public. But one of the things I would say, just a single defining moment when it comes to leadership and the proof of leadership is, what does someone do in the face of everybody around you telling you that there's nothing wrong? When everybody around you is saying that there is no problem, that everything is fine, and there is a moment in time when you ask yourself, I wonder what the person will do. And in that moment of time, when Diane Scipione showed up at City Council, and it was a defining moment, because it was only myself and Diane Scipione who stood up and said, there are problems and they need to be fixed. And that is leadership, because I had the courage to tell you the truth and to speak out when nobody else, except Diane and myself, would say that things were not right. And they fought us and fought us and fought us, but we were right.
I have the privilege of asking the last question, which I will direct to Ms. Frye first, and then ask Mr. Sanders for his response. It's a slightly broader question, because one of you will be the next mayor of our city, and our city does not subsist in a vacuum, of course. The next mayor, like every mayor of this city, will find himself or herself having to negotiate a sometimes difficult relationship with the state capitol in Sacramento and with the federal government in Washington. In Sacramento, a lot of these issues appear to swirl around matters of transportation and education, two issues vital to our city. In Washington, the issues tend to swirl around two of the defining attributes of this city that make it so unique. The fact that it sits within what is cumulatively one of the largest military installations on the planet, and secondly, that it is a frontier city. It sits on an international border. So, to you, Ms. Frye, first, what would you hope to accomplish in your term as mayor in your relationship with Sacramento and with Washington, if there were one choice you could make in each case?
As far as a specific area, well, first of all, just let me say I have a very good working relationship, not only with people in Sacramento, our elected officials in Sacramento. In fact, there's a member of our assembly here, Laurie Saldana, who I've known for many, many years, and we work very well together. And the same thing on a federal level. There are a variety of elected officials that I work with on a regular basis to help get funding here to the city. But I would say, if I were to pick one thing, just off the top of my head on a federal level, well, there's so many. But let's start with the, I know there's so many things we need. Let's start with the sewer infrastructure. One of the things that I would like to do, and I've been working on for many, many years, is trying to get a funding source that is similar to the federal transportation dollars that were provided, so that we can actually upgrade our sewer infrastructure and get assistance from the federal government, which of course helps save money for the ratepayers. On a state level, what would I like? I would like for the state to not take any of our sales tax money, to not take our redevelopment money, and to not take any of the money that they've taken. I would like them to leave. I would like them to leave our money alone, so we can have it here in San Diego. So those, if I could do those two things, keep some money and get some additional money for our infrastructure, I would feel successful.
Mr. Sanders.
Well, I'm not going to wish things. I have had experience when I was with the police department of being on several Department of Justice, COPS Office, National Institute of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, task forces, panels, committees, and what that brought back to San Diego in a 6-year period was $30 million in technology grants, community policing grants, and other grants that allowed us to improve our department and be a model for the rest of the country. I have also been back to Washington, D.C. lobbying for money. That is the reason you need to have a number 2 person in this city that is going to be strong like Admiral Ronnie Froman to run the business on a day-to-day level so that the mayor can be in Washington lobbying for federal border dollars. There is technology available, sensor technology that will safeten the border. There are border pass technologies that allow us to expand that. We need to have another border crossing. We need to have a safe border. We also need to get our fair share of Homeland Defense dollars. We're the largest military installation in the country. There are Homeland Defense dollars available, but the city has not been able to access that in the quality and the quantity that they need. And finally, at the state level, we're not getting our fair share of dollars. We haven't since 1978. It's time that the mayor of San Diego lead a group of other mayors and county supervisors to Sacramento to say, we need to get our fair share. You need to stop the big box building boom because you allow sales tax to be the driving force in everything that happens. We need to get our property tax back and put the sales tax back to the state so we don't give away big box locations for that tax.
Thank you. We will start in just a moment. Let me just mention our format for questions from the audience. We'll alternate between the 2 mics, of course, and we will allow each candidate to answer the same question. We're asking the candidates in this case to try to limit their answers to about a minute so we can get through a bunch of questions from the audience. We ask you who pose the questions, please be brief because we're here to hear from the candidates and respectfully not from you. Over here to my right, to Ms. Frye.
In the spirit of open and transparent government, do either of you have a prior or current business or community related association that might temper positively or negatively any decisions you may make as mayor? For example, Ms. Frye, you're a small business owner, your husband owns a business. Mr. Sanders, I understand you've been involved in First Coronado and Virtual Capital. So could you let us know how those associations might impact or present a conflict of interest as mayor?
As far as my business, Skip Frye Surfboards, and my husband, we don't have a lot of conflicts. We get along really well. When I get to see him. So that we don't accept any government funding. He builds all his own surfboards, and there's no conflict there. I cannot think of any business holdings or property interests or anything such as that would pose or have posed any sort of a conflict of interest. So that would be my answer.
I've been very upfront in my financial disclosures. I'm a part of 2 businesses, and I'm also on a board of directors for a bank. I'm on the board of directors for Coronado First Bank, which incidentally opens on Monday. Very excited about that. All the business is done in Coronado. No business is being done in San Diego. It's a community bank that will serve Coronadans. I'm part of Virtual Capital of California, which looks to universities for high-tech solutions to things. We're trying to fund a specific technology right now, but there's really no conflict. It does no business with the city. And finally, I'm a partner in Willow Creek Ventures, which is also an LLC. It's a partnership, and we have a company in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, that's doing business with Oak Ridge National Lab. Once again, it does no business with the city of San Diego or in the city of San Diego.
Thank you.
What are your positions on living wage and outsourcing city jobs?
Mr. Sanders goes first.
On the living wage issue, that's already been passed. As mayor, I'll work to implement it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's been passed. What was the second part of that? Outsourcing?
Yeah.
I have already said that I'd like to see a city charter amendment go out as soon as possible to the voters to allow us to outsource or to compete jobs. And I think that's important to stretch taxpayer dollars. I think it's important so that we can see how it can be done most effectively and less costly. I think it's important city workers have a chance to compete on those. And I think we have a very level playing field right now. And I think we need somebody from the outside to judge that competition so that we get the best services for the best price.
Ms. Frye.
I supported the living wage, and I continue to support it. And it did pass the City Council, and it will go into effect next year. As far as the privatization of our city jobs, no, I do not support that. I don't think that that is... I personally don't think that that is the way to go. I think that there are differences. I think it's important, however, I would agree that it's important that we make sure that the money that is being spent efficiently, that there are regular performance audits, that the money is being used and spent in the manner in which it was intended, you know, depending on whatever department that might be. But this threat of privatizing the entire, you know, city workforce, to me, is absolutely the wrong way to go.
Right here.
Candidates, you've fielded many questions about your stances on same-sex marriage in the state of California specifically, and I'm sure we all know that we're all familiar with your stances on that issue. What I would like to know is, one, how you feel that those issues are pertinent to our local election this year, and second, having said those words, what actions have you taken, and specifically what community events, LGBT community events, have you been physically present at?
Ms. Frye, I think you get to answer this one first, then Mr. Sanders.
Oh, that was a very long question. I'm sorry. So, specifically, what is the...
My question for you?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes. It is, we know your stance on same-sex marriage.
Oh, you
First
do?
of all...
Okay.
I've heard it.
No, that's good to know.
No, I think we're all familiar with that.
The question was how you see these issues affecting
being pertinent
this election.
To our current election.
And what LGBT events you've participated in.
How I see it pertinent to the current election, I don't see any specific ballot measures or issues that I'm aware of that are actually on the ballot that a mayoral candidate or any candidate or elected official could take a position on. Certainly we can make our views known about legislation that is either going to be vetoed or not vetoed. As far as my role is, again, to be accessible, to make sure that I appreciate and respect diversity, that I make sure that when I tell you something and I tell you my position on something, that it's very clear, it's very concise, you know where I stand. As far as different events that I have attended, I've been to so many events in the last couple of weeks, it's difficult to remember all of them, quite frankly. I've been to many dinners. I was at the Stonewall Democrats dinner or luncheon the other day. There's honest to goodness, I don't remember. I know that sounds terrible, but there's so many events, and I'll be happy to give you a list after I'll pull out my schedule and I'll name them all off for you.
That's all right. That's all right.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Sanders.
Well, I think that it's the fundamental dignity of all San Diegans that we need to keep in mind. And once again, I want to talk about NCCJ that I chaired for 3 years and was on the board for 10 years, about the diversity training, the tolerance training, the mixing groups of young people together to form towns. I was at the Gay Pride Parade. I was the only candidate to ride in that. I've been in it for the last 7 or 8 years as chief of police. I walked in it. As the United Way director, I was the Grand Marshal. I rode in it this year. I was at City Fest this year, the only candidate there. I've been at each of the dinners in the gay lesbian community that I've been invited to, and I believe that's been all of them. I think, once again, the fundamental dignity of every neighborhood in San Diego is of supreme importance, and I'll be the mayor of every neighborhood and every community in San Diego.
Here to Mr. Sanders first.
Hi. I believe that San Diego is the only major city in the country that does not fluoridate its water. Is it finally time for San Diego to fluoridate its water?
Well, I think it's absolutely ludicrous we don't fluoridate our water. I saw a report recently that fluoridated water was one of the top 10 scientific discoveries of this century. I have seen the results from dentists who have done study after study which shows there's absolutely no danger to anybody who has fluoridated water. At United Way, when I was the CEO there, we acted as a fiscal agent for the California Dental Association to bring fluoridated grants to San Diego, and the council dawdled on those and lost the money. We're still not fluoridating the water in San Diego. We're leaving our children at risk because of the health problems with their teeth. We can very easily fluoridate the water in San Diego and make sure that our children have strong teeth, that they have those protections that fluoride provides. It's crazy we don't do that.
Ms. Frye.
Actually, I have read and have talked to many dentists on this issue, and there is much disagreement in the scientific community about adding fluoride and fluoridating the water and adding more chemicals to our water. In fact, the Natural Resources Defense Council has put out reports. I have great concern about adding additional chemicals to our water supply. And to state that there is no potential for harm to people that drink fluoridated water, I do not believe it is completely supported by scientific evidence. And so, no, I do have concerns about it, and I think that we need to have more discussion on that. So.
Here, please, Ms. Frye will answer first.
Okay. Congratulations to both of you for being in this runoff. I have a two-part question. I get 30 seconds. You each get a minute. On the 14th of this month, H.R. 3760 was dropped in, on the floor of the House, and on 4/22nd, S1756 was introduced into the Senate. Both those bills would establish a cabinet-level Department of Peace. Over 60 representatives now across the U.S. support that bill. 12 states have adopted onto their party platforms, and 5 major city councils have adopted resolutions in support of it. So I would like to ask each of you, when you make it to mayor, would you be willing, first of all, do you know anything about the bill? And secondly, would you be willing to encourage the city council to adopt a resolution in support of it? Thank you.
Ms. Frye.
Yes. Certainly. I mean, that certainly makes sense. A Department of Peace. I mean, I think it's an idea whose time has come. I might not know the bill numbers by their numbers, but absolutely I would, and I would certainly support helping you push through a resolution at the City Council. So yes.
Mr. Sanders.
Well, I'm not familiar with the bill. I actually think, and this may be short-sighted, and I'm sorry if it is, that we have some fundamental problems in the city of San Diego that we really need to tackle. I think we need to solve the pension issue. I think we need to solve the structural underfunding. I think we need to streamline the city, make it more accountable to the taxpayers. I'm not sure that any city council resolution or any time we spend on that is going to be time spent on something that isn't going to be helping us more. If we start addressing problems which have not been addressed by council, if we start talking honestly to the community and actually putting out honest reports, putting out honest facts, even if they're embarrassing to the council, that we might have more of a chance to bring peace to the city than a bill that's going nationally. So I'm sorry, I just don't have a position on that. I think we've got other issues in San Diego that are important.
Please, Mr. Sanders will answer first.
I'd like to know why the candidates aren't talking about the reason the city was hiding its financial situation, which was to facilitate the sale of bonds to develop the ballpark and vicinity. Since that was one of the causes of the problem, would the candidates talk about increasing taxes on those who benefited from the sale of the ballpark bonds, particularly since it seems like those beneficiaries were pressuring the city to obscure the truth?
Well, having not been on the council or obscuring the truth or been pressured, I can tell you that our financial problems are more than just city ballpark bonds. Our financial problems are because city council members refuse to make tough decisions about spending. Our pension problems are because city council members decided not to put money into the pension system that they owed into that pension system. Our financial problems are because all this was done behind closed doors, was not done with any openness, and it's not one specific thing, it is a whole litany of things that have not seen the light of day and people refuse to talk about. Whether it's ballpark bonds, whether it's the RNC, whether it's a variety of things, we can only look at those things and see if they were a part of that. But I'm not for raising taxes, I'm for living within our means, and I'm not for raiding different budgets within the city of San Diego to pay for the things that we have started overlaying on communities that are great services, but we never provided resources to do that.
So you're not for
Excuse
pressuring
me,
those beneficiaries?
let's let Ms. Frye answer, please. You've had a chance to ask your question.
Related to the specific question on the ballpark as far as the issuance of bonds, that the Chamber of Commerce and a variety of interests came before the City Council and did try and pressure people to vote to issue those bonds, $168 million worth of bonds, at an interest rate of over 7.76%. I did not believe that that was a good rate, nor was it a good idea to get our city further in debt. And so I did not support the issuance of those bonds, and I opposed that, just so we can make that very clear. Do I think that that we're going to have to spend time now having to address the problems that were created back in 95, 96, 97, when my opponent was chief of police, had the opportunities to speak out and take a leadership role and did not? Yes, I am still trying to clean up the mess.
We have just a few minutes left, so please be brief. This gentleman.
Yes. A short time ago, the Supreme Court made a decision on eminent domain. I assume that both candidates are familiar with that decision. It was on page 1. And I'd like to know if, from both candidates, how they felt about the decision, whether they agreed or disagreed, and the reasons for that. Thank you.
Ms. Frye, you went first.
I did not agree with the decision, and in fact have taken actions. I sent a letter to Senator McClintock in support of legislation on a statewide level that would have not allowed the use of eminent domain to seize private property unless it was for a public use. Unfortunately, that did not get through the state legislature. As a result of that and the failure to be able to do anything to protect the public, I brought that before my Government Efficiency and Openness Committee and have set forth very strict standards to get a definition and to make sure that private property and small business owners' properties are not seized to give them to larger business owners who just use them to make a profit. So I don't support the decision, and I am in the process of making sure that it doesn't happen to more owners of private property here in the city of San Diego.
Mr. Sanders.
You know, it really doesn't matter whether we agree with the Supreme Court or not. They are the final arbiter in this land. And I think that's one of the things we need to figure. What is important to me is we have a standard in California, and I think San Diego's used it properly, and that's a standard you have to find blight. When we try to stretch to find blight, like when they were talking about finding a blighted condition in Mission Valley, which obviously didn't find that, you couldn't find a blighted finding there, that's when you have problems. But if you have a rigorous process, that you have public hearings, that you allow the public to comment on it, you find blighted conditions because they do exist under the guidelines that are there, I think that we have the correct format for that as long as we do it in the open, as long as we have a public process on that.
I'm afraid we have to go to closing statements. The gods of television have instructed me as such. I'm sorry to those who were waiting to ask questions. Given our arrangements with the coin toss earlier in the evening. Mr. Sanders has the opportunity to offer his closing statement, and then Ms. Frye. Mr. Sanders. No, she gets to choose. That was our arrangement with her losing the coin.
You know, I'm always happy to go first, especially on the meal line, so it's no problem for me. What I've tried to point out tonight is that there's a difference between what politicians say and what politicians do. To restore trust in city government in San Diego, the next mayor has to make tough decisions and accept responsibility for them, just as I have over a long career in San Diego in policing in United Way and at Red Cross. We need to change the ethic at City Hall so that ethics and customer services are the top priority, where we view customers, taxpayers, as the ones that we are actually there to work with. And we need to tell the public the truth, no matter how painful, no matter how bad it is, or no matter how embarrassing it is for any of us individually as elected office holders. I went through that process with the police department, I went through it with United Way, and I went through it with Red Cross. I made tough decisions. I accepted responsibility, and when I made mistakes, I accepted responsibilities for those mistakes, and I made them publicly. I replaced entrenched bureaucrats and changed organizational culture in all three organizations. That is extremely critical as we start reformatting city government so that it fits the needs of the public that it serves. I created open, honest, transparent organizations when I left each of those, and they still remain that way. My opponent talks a great game. Councilmember Frye has been part of the problem for the last 5 years at City Council, or last 4 years. She's avoided offering a real plan. She's avoided offering a real plan to fix the city's problems. She's campaigned as an advocate for open government, but when it's been convenient, just like voting for attorneys for themselves, they've retreated behind open doors. She talks about special interests and having sunshine laws and all of that, and the union support is the biggest support that she has. I respect labor unions. I've been a part of one. I've been a part of two. They do good things, but they have too much influence at City Hall. I know what it'll take to clean house and turn City Hall around, and if I'm elected mayor, that's exactly what I'll do.
Ms. Frye.
Thank you very much, and I again would like to thank California Common Cause, the University of California, San Diego, and the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. There are two things that I hope all of you will take from this debate tonight. And the first is that I am committed to open and honest government and ethical government. And I believe I have shown you that through my past many years as an elected official. I've been willing to take the stands that weren't popular. I've been willing to speak up and speak out for the public on numerous occasions. And you know it because you've been there with me. And the reason I did it is because it was the right thing to do. I also hope that you take from this debate that we have a very serious financial crisis, and it's not just the pension problem. There are so many financial problems within our city. We have deficit with our infrastructure, with our retiree health benefits, the unfunded needs for city operations. And taken together, these numbers are breathtaking. Now, while I wish these problems could be solved with easy and simple answers, the truth is they will not be. And that is why I have proposed my comprehensive financial plan. And I hope you will all have an opportunity to read that. Some have called it bold, some have called it audacious, and some have called it sweeping, and I couldn't agree more. They're all right. Because the real question you have to ask yourself in this election is who is telling you the truth and who has the best plan to get our city back on the road to fiscal recovery. Because at the end of the day, democracy doesn't work if important decisions are made behind closed doors. That is true. And it doesn't work if elected leaders fail to be straight with the people they are supposed to represent. I always have been straight with you, I always have been honest with you, and I always will be. As your mayor, I will change the way business is done at City Hall. I have proven that in my time as a city council member that I have laid out a plan, and I will do it from the first day I get into office. So thank you for your time, and I hope I may count on you for your vote on November 8th. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in thanking our candidates and the panelists, and thank all of you for attending. Good night.